on the way in. And then I'm going to just double check the roll on the way out. We'll try to not stay over time, but there's a lot of stuff to go over. Okay. Thing number one, I know because your school district is changing stuff, on the fly because of COVID, which is legitimate. I'm not complaining at all, that your English classes may be losing some time on Wednesdays. I am trusting that your English professor is not saying, well, forget that, then we're going to start having class on Tuesday or Thursday. If that's the case, you guys need to let me know. I'm going to, oppose that, of course. I'm not in favor of that. But I also understand that you may be asked to do some stuff that you don't have as much control over. So if something changes about your Monday, Wednesday class because of your teachers having every Wednesday off at the high school level, you've got to let me know. Okay, don't just stop coming to class on Tuesday or Thursday because your English teacher says you have to come, and don't let me know. You gotta let me know. I assume that if there are changes, maybe they'll somehow do something extra for you on Friday, but I have no idea. Okay, thing number two. I've gotten some complaints, not so much from you, but from some other students, that maybe because the syllabus says that I won't take very many things late, the assumption is I should take a lot of things late. And here's the deal on me taking stuff late. And this has been primarily a concern about the timed questions. It's made people feel like they should have more time to do those. No. I'm just going to go with no. Try to do those when you're supposed to do those. For everybody, that's next week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And you guys will have Wednesday afternoon off, so you can start doing those things on Wednesday afternoon. On the timed questions, remember you have to do them all at once. Okay, so you can't do them twice. You can't see the questions and then correct them. I'm sorry if that was not clear, but it's like a test. Think of it like a test. Okay, but a really short test, and a test where you have a lot of clues ahead of time. So not a very hard test, hopefully. It's not necessarily the goal to make it incredibly difficult, but I also don't want you looking up the answers. It's supposed to be some indication of stuff that you've learned along the way. So it's supposed to be like a test. It's our COVID version of a test, okay? The other stuff, all the questions ahead of time, so you can look that stuff up. Those things, those weekly questions, for the last set, I'm going to strongly suggest that you turn them in each week, because the end of class, like the last week, your stuff will be due on a Friday, and then my grades will be due on a Tuesday. Plus, I am very certain, because of the timing, that my other job where I grade for UT will also have due dates that week. So it will be very helpful to me, and also to you by extension, if on those last weekly questions that you turn those in actually once a week. I won't necessarily require it because I don't want to, change my syllabus, that sort of thing. But if you can be on time with that stuff, it's going to be helpful for all of us, because I'll get the grades done sooner. You'll get a chance to see the grades sooner. And then if you have any concern about those grades, there'll be a chance to have that discussion. There's not going to be a chance to have that discussion if my grades are due on Tuesday and everybody turns everything in on Friday and Saturday. Just won't have a chance to do anything other than grade. And it's different than high school grades. So when my grades are due, they're really due. And this is not a, well, we can fix that later sort of thing. It's pretty difficult to change. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is pretty difficult to change your college grade. It's not nearly as easy as changing high school grade. So we want to make sure that stuff is done, and that it's done at a reasonable time, and that you turn stuff in early enough that if you want to have a chance to look at your grade and converse with me about it, that there's time to do that. That all makes sense. So I'm not saying that about this set of stuff that's due. I'm saying that about the last set of stuff that's due. Okay. All right, next thing, extra credit. I'm sure you're already done with the extra credit because you missed 2 days of class. So I'm sure with those 2 days, you were sitting around saying like, hey, maybe I can do the extra credit. That's probably what you were doing. Yes, probably, maybe. But on the off chance that it wasn't, that stuff is due on Friday. Okay, so extra credit due on Friday. We're just about to look at what that is. Extra credit, okay? All right, I'm trying to take roll, even though I said I would do it later. I thought, well, I'll try it now. All right, I'm looking for Connor Lewis. Is Connor Lewis here? All right, if you know him, text him. Tell him he has to come to class. Unless he's sick. Well, even if he's sick, we can't get it from him, right? All right, no, if it's serious, we don't want you to come to class. We know you have to rest up. Extra credit, here we go, with the typo. Sorry about the typo. The word for is in there twice. Yeah, okay. So this extra credit was the propaganda exercise. So what my expectation is that you'll watch the video, which is about Japanese internment, where we took the Japanese from the East Coast, removed them from their property, sold their property, they lost a bunch of money, and we stuck them in prison camps to protect them, potentially, and to protect everybody who wasn't Japanese descent from them. So the video talks about why that was important, why it was necessary, shows that they really didn't mind that much. So if you watch that video, what I would ask you to do is this thing right here. Be sure to discuss the source of the propaganda. So where did it come from? You know, who created it, the intended audience, who was supposed to see it, and where they're supposed to see it. Any part of the item that you think seems exaggerated or dishonest, and whether you think the propaganda was effective. So talk about certain phrases or certain aspects of the video, what happened and why you think that wasn't exactly the truth. As a rule, propaganda has an element of truth, but it either leaves out an important part of the story or exaggerates a part of the story. And you'll notice that in there. Now, to be honest with you, there were very few, if any, instances where people resisted going into the camps or tried to break out. The biggest instance is that Fred Korematsu fellow who said he was Chinese and hid at his girlfriend's house. Now, when he got caught, he went to the camp and then sued. So most of the resistance to internment camps was through legal means. I mean, they went through the legal system, not terribly successfully at first, but eventually so. But that video is online at that. Right. I'm slamming the door there. All right, let me see what you're chatting about. We may have to mute somebody, right? Okay, it's this Friday. This Friday. Yeah, and you'll find that. I know it's in the assignment section, and it may also be in the course document section, but I know for sure it's in the assignment section. I think it's in both, but do this Friday.
Excuse me?
Yes.
So this is extra credit?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure because I thought it was a thing that we had to do.
It's not a thing. You don't have to do it. So definitely extra. If you don't get to it, don't worry about it. But you know,
Okay.
if your grade's kind of stinking, you know, you might want to do it.
Okay.
Even if your grade's really good, but you think it might stink next month. So no, but extra, you know, extra points are always better than not enough points. And it might not take that long, you know. Even if you just share, even if you just get a couple points, that's more points than you had before. All right, next thing to look at. It's like somebody's closing their car door. I really need to figure it out and mute somebody. Right? Timed question study guide. So on the top of this is just your list of stuff to study. This is in the course documents section. So make sure you study those things. And the quiz, the timed questions, that'll be available Wednesday. That's next Wednesday, of course. 12:01, I think is the plan, through Friday at 11:59. So that'll be available, relatively soon. And when you are off next Wednesday, in that afternoon, that might be a good time to work on it, or at least study for it. But I know you're going to have stuff to do for your English class. One of the things I wanted to remind you of, if you're working on other things for the class and want a little more information, optional video, online sources are here. I would highly suggest to you, if you have time, this one, where it says, "This is long but really good," about the civil rights movement. This is a video. It's about 30 minutes long, which, all these other videos are like 2 to 5 minutes. So this is a bigger video. I think the Malcolm X video is a little longer too, but you don't have to watch the whole thing. You'll get the idea after 4 or 5 minutes on that one. But this video is from Teaching Tolerance, and it's called A Time for Justice, and it goes through every major event of the early part of the civil rights movement. The reason that might be helpful is this week's question and next week's question are in part about the civil rights movement. Huh. Oh, okay. I was looking at this and I was like, why in the world is there a New Deal video in chapter 25? And I remember the answer now, because their question was to compare the New Deal and the Great Society. And that was such a difficult question that I got rid of that question. So your question for next week is, was the 60s really a more free and open society? So the New Deals, excuse me, not the New Deal stuff. The Great Society stuff will help you in talking about whether poverty was alleviated, which made things, more free and open. But civil rights stuff will probably be more helpful. So, and I may look for other resources. I may not, because you've got the textbook and you'll know stuff, so it'll be okay. I think it'll be okay. Yeah. All right. And what's the other thing we want to look at? Weekly questions. Oops, let me find the share it thing. Weekly questions. Okay. So just as a reminder, your weekly questions are here. World War II as the Good War, evaluate that title, excuse me, for reading issues there. Is it appropriate? Why or why not? So that's where you talk about obvious things that were good as a result of World War II, and maybe things that were not as good that either happened during World War II or as a result. So you could talk about, I know you'll talk about obvious stuff like internment or continued segregation within the military, but you can also mention that there'll be a push to desegregate the military in part because of World War II. You might mention, the fall of Hitler, but then the rise of Stalin. That seems sort of bad. The end of that version of totalitarianism, but then the beginning of the Cold War, which is going to cause a new set of problems. You can talk about the economy improving. That's, we like that. United States, go team. But I mean, whether you think capitalism is great or bad or, great or terrible, everybody needs money to pay their bills. So, oh, excuse me. Question number 2. So for question number 1, make sure you talk about a few very specific things. I'm always looking for specific examples, not just general stuff. I want some evidence that you learned something because of this class, that you either looked it up in the textbook or we talked about it in class. And I really am expecting that your source material is the textbook. There are a variety of reasons for that. One of the things that I noticed, and I talked about this with the other 2 classes, but I'll talk about it with you as well, especially those questions about the New Deal. There's so much copy and pasting going on in the New Deal question, okay, from last unit. goodness, you guys have got to make sure that you're not copying and pasting from online sources, because I don't know what you've learned if you're just copying and pasting. Put it in your own words, okay? The reason I know that, aside from the plagiarism check that the stuff goes through, is you're using words that I know don't have great meaning to you. So make sure when you answer these questions that you could explain every single word you use. Okay? It needs to be in your vocabulary. Because there were certain, especially about the New Deal, there were words that, that described economic policy that I know none of you ever use. You haven't even had your economics class yet. So, yeah. And it was true of the adult students as well, because they'd had their economics class, but nobody paid that much attention. So stop copying and pasting. Just stop it, okay? Don't do it. It's bad practice. Put stuff in your own words. Okay, that's the end of lecture about that. All right, question number 2, Cold War, battle between freedom and slavery. Explain how the Cold War had come to be seen this way, events that illustrate that view, and historical consequences of the view. So you got to talk about rise of Stalin, Iron Curtain. You want to talk about maybe Long Telegram, Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan. But again, I want some specific examples of stuff that happens during this time period where you can talk about a person, a place, an event, a policy, that sort of thing. And then with events, you're probably talking Berlin blockade, airlift, maybe you're talking about Korean conflict. But there are specific things, the advent of the Cold War, which is another historical consequence. And then historical consequences, of course, that big divide between East and West, setting up the Soviet Union and the US as the two major superpowers, development of NATO versus Warsaw Pact. There's lots of things you could discuss. So make sure you pick some specific things. Okay, civil rights movements, what we're talking about today. You want to mention some very specific events. I would suggest to you that you talk, maybe start all the way back with just a mention of Plessy versus Ferguson as the establishment of segregation, but then move pretty quickly to a movement away from segregation because of World War II. You can talk about desegregation of the military by Truman in 48. Then you could talk about to secure these rights, the federal government, what is the word? I guess assessment of civil rights in the United States and how it was time to desegregate every public part of the United States. Then, of course, Brown versus Board of Education. You can mention Emmett Till. You can talk about Rosa Parks. You can talk about Little Rock Central. So specific events, okay? So, but as far as why, World War II and Brown versus Board of Education are going to set up those foundational things, all right? And then we'll talk more about the 4th question next week. All right. You are on chapter 24. It is true. Yep, you're on chapter 24. Although the other classes, we've had 2 more classes than you, so we've gone over a lot more stuff. All right, and next week is chapter 25. So, and also I'm assuming that you're reading the textbook because you have a link that helps you get to it, or you can download the whole thing, or maybe even you bought it. I promise you that is the best source of information because everything in there is true. Everything in there is true. Some of the weird stuff you guys are using from online, it's like, that's not even true. Yeah, it's just not. So make sure, that you use, the reason you don't want to just pick an online source is you don't know how accurate it is. Dr. Foner is, he's pretty well respected. So I think he's a good source. Yeah, I think he is. I know it's harder to copy and paste, but you're not supposed to do that anyway. And when you quote the textbook, which is okay, just don't overdo it, and remember to put as much of it in your own words as possible. And also, some of you, especially, the New Deal question again. It was like you just listed every New Deal agency that ever happened. That is not the complete answer to the question. At some point, I want to know, what did you think about certain things? So parts of those questions are, what's your opinion? So expressing your opinion is also going to help me see what you've learned and the depth of what you've learned. Because you may, I also want to know if you don't get something and you're not telling me during class. So I guess my only hope of knowing that is reading your stuff. Okay. All right, let's talk about chapter 24. Sorry, trying to share it and I'm not. Let me check the chat. Goodness. Goodness. The question was, watching the class videos enough information? Well, one, you're in the class, so I'm hoping you're paying attention, but I know what you're trying to say. There's a reason that I ask you to get the textbook, and it's because what I say in class tends to be fairly general. The stuff in the textbook gives you the specific stuff that proves the general things that I'm saying. Now, I can, because I've taught history for longer than you've been alive, I know lots of the specific things in the book already, but you don't. So that's there for you as a reference to help you. You're supposed to read that, and then I go over the lecture and you go like, oh yeah, I remember reading that. So when I lecture, it's the second time you've been over the information. Here's what we know about learning. The more times you go over the information, the more times the more chance there is that that information becomes meaningful to you. And I don't know, I was talking to somebody at soccer yesterday and they go like, I hate history because it's just a waste of time, which is always what a history teacher wants to hear, that my life's work is a waste of time. So thank you very much, young people. However, I get that when you're 16 or 17, you only value math and science because someday you're all going to be very wealthy as doctors, lawyers, and engineers. Nobody says, I'm going to be a wealthy historian someday, because you're not. Dr. Foner is, the rest of us are not. Now, there's like 10 of us that are, but I'm not. However, understanding history is important at certain times, like right now, during the election, and people saying like, how come they can't just get the votes counted? And how come we don't know who the president is? And who is cheating and who is lying? I have, a fairly well-developed answer to that question because of what I do for a living. There are times that the breadth of historical knowledge that you could acquire is useful. And it won't just be at election time, it'll help you understand why certain groups of people get along, why certain people don't, historic background of, parts of your future profession. Politics in general are kind of important, and history gives you the foundation for politics. And if you're going to be successful at almost anything you do, politics, for better or worse, are going to be a part of that. So what I'm trying to say is, I know that your goal in this class is just to get an answer and to pass, and maybe to do that with learning as little as possible. Your goal is not necessarily to develop a breadth of knowledge that goes with you for the rest of your life. My thought is, this is the beginning of your study of history, and this is supposed to give you a general background, and you're supposed to kind of figure out what part of it's interesting to you, and you'll keep studying that part on your own, maybe not directly, but indirectly. If you don't read the textbook, the only view of history that you're getting is mine. And you're not getting all the data that supports my view of history or anybody's view of history. Look at the stuff Dr. Foner put in the book for you personally. I'm sure he did it for you personally, because that guy is a pretty well thought of historian. He's putting important things in there. As you're reading through that, as time goes along, not necessarily during this class, but you go like, oh, I remember we talked about World War II in my history class, and we talked about this Japanese internment, but I'm wondering, Did they try to do stuff like that to any other groups? And then you could study that and you go like, oh, they did try that with the Germans and Italians. Why did that not work? This should be the beginning of your study of history, which should impact everything else that you study. And truthfully, I know this is not the lecture you were hoping for, but truthfully, all of your knowledge should fit together. So your knowledge of history should impact your knowledge of math and science, because it helps you understand why certain things are discovered at certain times. Like, one of the things we'll look back at potentially is, why did we develop a type of vaccine for a type of virus in 2020 or 2021, and why did it happen so quickly? Because one of the wealthiest countries on the earth committed lots of its federal resources to developing a vaccine for coronavirus. That's the same answer as, why did we develop a vaccine for polio in the 50s? Same answer. The reason we want to do that at that time is because that's the time that disease was spreading. So math and science and history and English all should go together, and those bases of knowledge should make all of the other knowledge more meaningful. What I'm saying to you is, read the textbook. It gives you a better background. That's what I'm saying. And even if all you do is look at the textbook to help you answer those weekly questions, that's still better than never looking at the textbook. And it's not for your entertainment purposes. It's to enrich you. It's to enhance your knowledge, which just, I don't know, you may not believe that you need, but we all do. We all do. I guarantee you, every time we get a new president, no matter who it is, I always wish they had a better knowledge of history. I do. Because there are certain things they just simply would not do if they had a better knowledge of history. They're like, invade Afghanistan. I'm really sure that we wouldn't do that if we had a better knowledge of history. But it's not, yeah, okay. All right, let's look at the notes. Chapter 24. All right, here we go. Sorry. That was my high school teacher rant about why things other than math and science are important. I don't know what it is with kids. Like, for the last 10 years, I taught forever, it's 31 years. The last 10 years, every student I ever taught thought they were going to be a millionaire, and it was going to happen from math and science. So nothing else mattered except band. What's up with you kids? You're not making any money from band, but that seems to matter to you. Kids, what are we going to do? You know what mattered to us in the 50s? Money. So look, we're back to full circle. We're back to the money thing. But it mattered because we had a lot of it. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about this era is that we have a really broad affluence. And you're going like, what the heck is she talking about? What I mean is that the standard of living in every socioeconomic bracket rises. So poor people are less poor. Middle class people also rise in wealth, and wealthier people get wealthy as well, wealthier. And it all seems to be at about the same percentage. That hardly ever happens. Typically, when the economy is going really well, it does impact the people at the higher end more than in the middle and at the lower end. This is an era where everybody seems to benefit equally, or at least percentage-wise. And part of that is we've worked for a decade, essentially, and not had anything to buy. So people have really saved up money. And also, we've really sacrificed, either, on purpose or unintentionally, because, you had Great Depression. So really 15 or 20 years. 10 years of the Great Depression, you're not really saving money there, but you're sacrificing. And then World War II and the beginning of Korea, you've got, another 8 years where we're sacrificing and we're working a lot and we don't have anything to buy. So we've got all that pent up sacrifice plus money, and now we're going to spend all the money. Hence the nickname, the golden age of capitalism. So this is going to be the greatest expansion of the gross national product. It's a good time for the United States. It makes us the world's economic power, which we were kind of on the edge of being before the war, and certainly had become because of the war, and will continue to be. Some people would argue we still are. I don't know, would you argue that? Do you think we're the wealthiest nation in the world? This is where I check to see if I lost you in the middle of my rant about kids just loving math and science.
No.
You don't think we're wealthy anymore? Who's beating us?
Isn't it
I mean, wealthy, not the wealthiest.
Well, who's the wealthiest then? Oh, I'm looking in the chat. Yeah, I'd go with China. I think so. Would you rather live in China than here? I know you don't speak Chinese, most of you. So if you could speak Chinese, would you rather live in China than the United States? Because it's wealthier?
the United States is fine.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Nobody wants to go to China. You should go visit, maybe, certain places. My nephew, trying to pay off his college debt, be careful of that. Singapore might be interesting, yeah. Went to China to teach English. That's a thing. You can probably pay off you can either do that or work in the oil fields. And my nephew's a little more like me, so the oil fields is not the right place for him. So, yeah, China, not a very even distribution of wealth is part of the problem. The other problem is that freedom thing, not as big in China, you probably heard. Singapore, more even distribution of wealth. Personal freedom, you know, Eastern and Western countries, very different. So personal freedom in Eastern countries is not, it's not as prized a quality as in the West. So it would be an adjustment for almost all of us to move to an Eastern country, even if the overall impact of going there is better. I think Singapore probably would be, you know, a fairly nice place to live. I've got a nephew-ish, my niece's husband, who's from Japan, and I think he liked Japan quite a bit, but there's some geographic issues there that are problematic. They get the tidal waves, the tsunamis quite a bit, and because they have nuclear power, that's occasionally when you have an earthquake or a tsunami and a nuclear power plant, that could be problematic. All right, but here we're going to argue that we have wealth and freedom, which we're still probably going to argue. And of course, our big rival during this time period, you know, evil, godless communists of the Soviet Union. So you're familiar with them. If you're wondering what's going on in the 50s, because we have money, we're buying stuff. We're probably buying more stuff than we can afford. But we're buying a lot of stuff, including houses and consumer goods and cars. We buy new cars a lot, whether we need them or not. Typically, a family has one car. That's kind of normal during this time period. Maybe when we get into the 70s and 80s, where it's more common for both parents to work full time, the two-car family is much more likely. However, that's starting to be a thing. We also all have televisions in the 50s, which means that we're going to have a shared popular culture. Do you think we have a shared popular culture now? It's more time for audience participation. Shared popular culture. Do you know what I mean by popular culture? Sorry, my phone just rang. It's like, did you call me? No. So if I say popular culture, what do I mean? Did I lose you again?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Thanks for answering that. What is popular culture? That's what I'm asking. I'm trying to type it in, but I'm terrible at typing.
Isn't
What?
that like when you have one thing that's shared, or I'm not sure how to phrase it.
No, that's fair. So the shared part's the popular part, yes. Because we
like
all,
when
Isn't it just like recognized, like recognized like
media.
culture, I guess?
yeah, you know,
When
it can be
it's
media
that's
for sure. Yeah, music or art, television. Like if there's a certain musical artist that you all think is great, then that person is probably an important part of popular culture. Like, I don't know, because the only person I know of right now is Cardi B. And it's just because whatever song she most recently put out was vulgar. But I don't know anything about the song and haven't heard it. And I don't even know if she's popular. But I think for your generation, it's hard to have a shared popular culture because you can all make up your own access to popular culture because you don't watch television. I mean, I know you may have a television, but you watch Netflix or streaming television. You don't listen to the radio. I don't know what you do. You stick those things in your ears and listen to music somehow. I guess you download it, or I don't know how you get music. But when I was a kid, and even before that, you had like rock music and country music. And everyone seemed to know both of those things because those were our only two options, and you heard them on the radio. There were 3 television stations, and we watched MASH, or we watched a long time ago Andy Griffith or I Love Lucy. But these things were shared popular culture. So popular culture is the stuff in the media, entertainment, art, music, that sort of stuff that large groups of people are familiar with. And shared popular culture is not as likely now as it is back then because you don't all watch and do the same things because you have more access to media. Like some of you are enjoying your own popular culture right now instead of paying attention to class. You know what I'm saying. But during this time period, we had a shared popular culture. And that's also the thing that the CIA was investing in, CIA and Defense Department were investing in to make sure that the popular culture was wholesome and patriotic, like our current popular culture, like Cardi B. I think she's probably both wholesome and patriotic. I'm sure that neither of those things are true. All right, so we all watch the same television stations, we listen to the same music, we danced the same way, and we got married early. So people got married in their late teens, usually somewhere between 18 and 19, so right after high school, and then you started having kids, probably 3, relatively quickly as well. This era, 46 to 60, give or take a year or two, is also called the baby boom generation because everybody's super happy, so they get married early and they have kids, lots of them. And if you're thinking, why does this matter to me? It's because you're about to pay for their Social Security, and there's a lot of them. So this group really does matter. This group also makes the country wealthy. This group is also going to make a lot of weird political decisions. It'll get us involved in Vietnam. And I don't know, this group of folks, they're interesting. But they're important culturally, economically, that kind of stuff. So there's a bunch of them. Get married early. They tend to move to the suburbs. We did mention a couple of times the gap between rich and poor narrows during this time period, which really is unusual. Manufacturing continues to be important, so people are making cars and consumer goods, and we're buying those here. And because a lot of those jobs are union jobs, their wages are really high. So high that you can afford to, like, just the dad work, maybe the mom has a part-time job, but the dad's salary by itself is enough to buy a house and put the kids through college, and no one goes into debt. And part of that's because the union wages are so high. That's also part of the reason manufacturing jobs leave the United States, because union wages are so high. And people who manufacture stuff say, like, how do we save money? How can we make more profit? We can pay our employees less. But if unions have negotiated a certain contract, then they can't pay their employees less. So they say, like, hey, we can make stuff in Mexico. We don't have to pay them as much. Or other places as time goes along. So manufacturing dominates through the 50s, but starts to decline even in the 60s. Information-related professions will begin to be more dominant after the mid-50s into the 60s. So computer-related stuff, accounting, business sort of stuff, teaching, you know, professions like that, kind of professions that you want, the architecture, engineering, medical professions, legal professions, that sort of stuff. All right, agricultural production rises, but the number of farmers decreases, so farms become corporate and we invest in them rather than run them, and farmers are more efficient, or farms are more efficient because they use modern machinery, lots of fertilizer and insecticides, and better irrigation, more efficient irrigation. The fertilizer and insecticide part might pose a problem because while those things are really good at killing bugs and making sure that plants are really hardy, they also have some interesting side effects like birth defects and cancer and things like that. So we'll figure those things out, and then that may lead us to an environmental movement of some sort that you'll see happen a little more in the 60s. We grow most of the food crops, grain crops in the middle of the country, fruits and vegetables in the south and southwest, Texas, Arizona, California, also Florida. I didn't mean to leave them off the list. All right, people are moving to suburbs. These names are going to be important to you at some point in the very near future. William and Albert Levitt really create the first kind of prefab, all the houses look the same suburbs. The biggest one, earliest one they create is Long Island, New York. So you can work in New York City but live on Long Island, and they have all these nice roomy houses that you could live in. Now, these roomy houses are probably not as big as houses from the 1990s and early 2000s because we just got really big about our houses at that point. But they're bigger than, you know, pre-World War II houses. They might even have 2 bathrooms instead of 1. But the idea is you'd live in a suburb, you'd have a 2-car garage, at least 1 car, maybe 2, and all the houses would look kind of the same. But that's going to save money on design, so they're going to be affordable. And also because gasoline is cheap, it's like 25 cents a gallon, you can live really far away from your job and drive back and forth each day. And so that develops a different sort of culture. The other thing that makes this possible is we build a bunch of roads during this time period. We build a bunch of roads during this time period because of the Interstate Highway Act. Interstate Highway Act. So the Interstate Highway Act is part of a defense program in the Eisenhower administration. And what we've decided is if the evil, godless communists of the Soviet Union decide to invade the United States, we have to make sure that we can support troop movements throughout the country. So we have to have roads that the Army can use to transfer military equipment back and forth, but they also need to be long enough and straight enough that we can land planes on them as well if we need to land them. So that's why interstate highways every so often have to have a 2-mile stretch that's perfectly straight. And also the bridges have to be a certain height to make sure that the military transports can get underneath those bridges. The defense budget pays for these highways, and the end result, you probably heard, we didn't get invaded by the Soviet Union, but the end result is really good highways. So we have an enhanced trucking industry, so it's easier to transport goods across the country. Before, I mean, we had a good railroad industry, but you could only transport goods where there were railroad tracks. There's so many more roads than railroad tracks that this is going to create a real boom in the trucking industry, which is going to create a real boom in consumer goods because we can get those back and forth. And also we'll create a system, a road system that allows us to have vacations, affordable vacations. So you're going to make a road trip to national parks, or you're going to go to amusement parks, or you're just going to go to other parts of the country and see things you hadn't seen before. That also means you're going to have more restaurants and hotels. We're also going to have shopping malls, which we hadn't had before. Normally you had stores in the downtown and everybody went downtown, to go shopping. Now people live in the suburbs, so you're going to build these big shopping malls in the suburbs. Now, as far as shopping malls go, dang, class, we have so much more to talk about. Shopping malls in this era are probably a little bit more like those outlet malls that we have, where you have a bunch of connected stores, but you enter and exit individually, you know. So you park and then walk around the whole thing. It's the 80s and 90s where you get the like Lakeline Mall kind of thing, where it's one big indoor facility and then you just walk around the whole thing. I don't know if that makes any sense, but just slightly different sorts of shopping experience. I guess now you just order stuff online, right? All right, so family life really mattered. The assumption was you're going to get married, you're going to have kids, you're going to live in the suburbs, you're going to buy a house. You also need to raise your kid right, because if you mess up, your kid's going to be gay or a communist or a gay communist. So anything that's different about your kid, if they have a learning disability, a mental health issue, it's because you weren't a good parent, which puts a lot of pressure on parents. And also means that if there's anything different about you, there's something wrong with you. So this is kind of where you get that cultural thing in the 50s, where everybody has to fit in and be the same. And if you have a problem, we definitely don't discuss it. We cover it up during this time period, because it means there's something wrong with you if you have a problem, and nobody wants to have something wrong with them. This Dr. Spock's Baby and Child Care book was really kind of seen as the Bible of how to raise your kids. And everybody got that when they had a baby in the 50s. And it led to moms being really tense, because the thought was, you know, if you didn't get your baby and keep them from crying or feed them the proper amount of food at the right time, at the right age, if you made any mistakes, it was going to lead to a long-term problem for your child. So it was really important for parents, especially moms, that their kids behaved well in public. And this was also an era, I say this as a former high school teacher at some school that you all attend, this is also an era where if you misbehave at school and the teacher would call your parents, it was a huge embarrassment to your family, and you would get in enormous trouble at the house. And that's going to be true, you know, 50s, 60s, and 70s. You start to see it change, maybe late 70s. And certainly in a big way in the modern era, where, you know, if I were to call a parent at a former high school I taught at, the parent might not always be supportive. They might say, well, you know, the problem is you, it's not my child, that sort of thing. No one thought that in the 50s. Everybody needed to fit in, and authority was always right, which is why it's a weird time to have the civil rights movement, which is where we're kind of headed. I am concerned, I will be honest, not about the civil rights movement. I was concerned about that too. Because we've missed so many classes, I don't think we're going to have a very good discussion of the civil rights movement today. So we may have to save some of that for next time. And I know there are a couple of you, like, I have to write my weekly question this week. And if you do, I mean, go ahead. Don't be distressed about that at all. But we are probably going to have more of the good, solid civil rights movement discussion at the beginning of next class, just because there's, you know, you've missed 2 full classes, and your classes are already 30 minutes shorter than my other ones. So, you know, I'm doing what I can, but we're not going to be there today. We'll probably get caught up next time. Okay. Other thing you were doing in the 50s is you were going to church, because everybody did, because you didn't want to be an evil, godless communist. We're also not as concerned about whether you're Protestant or Catholic or Jewish. As long as you're one of those 3, we're okay with you. There's more of an emphasis on what's in common between those 3 large groups of religious people. So they're monotheistic religions that are based on Western traditions, Bible, Torah, that sort of thing. And they have some shared beliefs, you know, the 10 Commandments kind of morality, which I also know. I mean, I know I've studied other cultures as well. Almost everybody has very similar basic religious beliefs. But we're Western, so Christianity and Judaism's kind of our thing. As long as you embraced one of those faith traditions, we were okay with you. They tended to emphasize more positive thinking, do the right thing and you'll be blessed, a very American version of religion. And if you don't do the right thing, then God might punish you and you'll be poor. Or maybe you'd be a gay communist who was poor, I don't know. But something bad would happen in your life. So there's sort of this idea that if you do the right thing, whatever that is, that you will be prosperous, and evidence that you do the wrong thing is that you're not as prosperous. Almost everybody went to church at least once a week, probably twice. Going to church was a thing during this time period that everybody seemed to do. Politics, also a thing people seem to be interested in. The basic similarities between the Democrats and Republicans were that they were strong on defense and they were anti-communist. That we could count on. The differences, a little more complicated, kind of depended on the region. The Deep South, white people are still the only folks voting, and those guys almost exclusively vote for Democrats. So during this era, Southern states always pick Democrats. If you're paying any attention to the current election, you are noticing that Southern and Midwestern states almost always pick Republicans. You're noticing that. In this era, the South always voted for Democrats, and they called it the solid South. I mean, nobody would even worry about the vote counts during this time period. It's like, we know they're going to vote for the South. Cities tended to vote for Democrats. That is still true, with the exception of Texas, maybe, although it's relatively true in Texas even. California is very conservative, or fairly conservative in that era. Remember that that's the state of Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. So California is fairly conservative during that era because there's a lot of money in California, and even the entertainment industries are run by fairly conservative people. So California is much more Republican than Democrat in that era, although there's a little bit of each, and it does tend to be moderate. If you're looking for anybody who's kind of way left of center, they're hard to find during this time period. Probably, oddly enough, Minnesota would be your best place to look, and maybe New York City, but not in the same way, not super liberal. It's run fairly conservatively in that era. Other differences politically, let's see. Cities vote for Democrats, California conservative, some more Republican. The Midwest, typically Republican. Democrats are probably more pro-union. And those guys, remember, they make pretty decent money. So they just want to make sure that unions are protected. Foreign policy is pretty similar, whether you're Republican or Democrat. You want to just not necessarily destroy the Soviet Union, but make sure we're able to if we have to. The foreign policy in this era is mutually assured destruction or massive retaliation, which leads us to an arms race. And we want to make sure that we can produce the best, most deadly weapons on the planet. We want to make sure we do that rather than the evil, godless communists of the Soviet Union. All right, so we got to foreign policy, which might be where we start next time. My goodness. All right. So much stuff really fast. All right, don't leave just yet, but let me see if you have any questions, and then I want to double check on the roll. That won't take very long because almost all of you are here when I took it. All right, do you have any questions? Are you still there? I know you're still there, but are you paying attention? Do you have any questions?
Yes.
Thanks for still being there. I appreciate it. All right, I sense you're not going to ask any questions, so I'm